right. So, sorry, Ahmadiel. Now, I need you just to elaborate on these questions, man, because it's a lot going on in the world. Like always.
Right.
And
But
then
more so now.
yeah, definitely more
Like
so
never
now.
before. Right.
And this is, I feel like it's an urgency for us to, those that have the understanding as a Hebrew Israelite to unite and come together, underneath a declaration that we can create. And like I said earlier, I believe that Demona has the greatest model of what we can do on a greater scale if we link into with each other and come up with some type of declaration. You know, and for those who don't want to work with the Mona community, I say the Mona community, but it's the kingdom, because like I said, the kingdom don't come with observation. And y'all build the kingdom. The kingdom is within us, and y'all been building this. Y'all been building this, and this is important. So let me dive right into these questions. Now, being a Hebrew Israelite, it comes with a lot of responsibility. Can you elaborate on some of the responsibilities of a Hebrew Israelite? Much is given, much is required. Can you elaborate to the viewers on, the type of responsibilities we have as Hebrew Israelites in today's society?
Well, one of the primary consequences and subsequent elements of finding out who you are is, what am I supposed to be doing? What's my job description? If you join any company, you might get a real fancy title, but what does that mean exactly? What's my job description? What am I responsible to do? And it's no different in saying you're a Hebrew Israelite. And so for us, and I have to say this, the awakening of our people, in reality, most of the brothers and sisters who comprise that body of men and women, they're recently just come out to church. And so they've brought with them the grave cloths of that doctrinal deception. And so in terms of identity, and many of the brothers, that for them, that is the work. That is their job description, to teach identity.
Yeah.
But obviously, if we were motivated back based on Ben-Ami's 1966 vision, that he himself, was a byproduct of his own asking the elders in his congregation, when do we go back to the land? We were deeply steeped in the fact that we were Hebrew Israelites. So we were clear on what our identity was. And it was that identity that led us back to the land in 1969. So on arrival here, everything changed. On arrival, the next question was, now what? Now what?
What's next?
What's next? What do we do next? We're here now. And honestly, coming with, because I had it, coming with that Christian background and understanding and veil, it was like we're supposed to be, everybody under his own vine and fig tree, kick back and get grapes popped in our mouth all day, which would be kind of boring, with all the beautiful, tasty fruits and vegetables in this land, and all we would eat was some grapes. No, it was more than that.
Yeah, true.
And the reality is that was when the work began. The journey was just beginning.
Yeah.
There was something that we had to do, and the job description of a Hebrew Israelite, you're a Hebrew, we're supposed to be a blessing to the nations. We have to fulfill Abraham's promise, to be a blessing to the nations. How do you interpret being a blessing to others? Israelites were to be a light unto the nations.
Yeah, indeed.
So Bibi Netanyahu ain't got no problem in saying that it's their military might, it's their finances, it's their technology, the startup nation, and we don't see it the same way. We don't put our faith in technology. When that plug is pulled, they in trouble. This is not some new development. Back in the early 80s, 83, 84, the Jerusalem Post, the English language newspaper here, one of them, they did a poll, and they asked Israelis, who do you put more faith in? And they gave them three choices: God, the IDF, Israel Defense Forces, and their politicians. And what was their answer? The IDF. 85%. 85% of Israelis in 1983, 84 had more faith in the IDF than Yah, than the Creator. So we know that Yah brought us here, and it's Yah that protects us and causes us to be a village of peace, where some of our doors aren't locked, where we don't have rapes and murders and drive-by shootings and the children out there shooting marbles, and shooting hoops, and you don't hear cursing and they bow to. I'm sure they don't, when they see you, a stranger, someone new, but they know enough to know. Oh, some of them know you by name now, I'm sure, but they respect you and they bow. And that's how they were trained and how they were raised up. So the job description is vast and broad, and it's a heavy responsibility. And in the context of today's world that has gone so far astray, the book of Psalms says that the earth, the foundations of the earth are out of course. And in Hebrew, it's not foundations, it's institutions. So when you talk about institutions, family, marriage, education, the fundamental elements of any society and civilization, those are institutions. That's how you sustain yourself. That's how you build a future. And so those things are whack right now. When you think about Trump and his administration, and Trump is not the problem. Trump is simply the manifestation of the world having gone so far astray. And particularly the bastion of Western civilization, the United States of America. But we saw this coming. The prophets told us these things. And again, that's what we saw in 67. That's what we saw in 75, 77 for myself. We saw that. And we're taught where there's no vision, people perish. Ben-Ami wrote in his book, God, the Black Man and Truth, toward the end, Heaven and Hell, Truth and the Myth. He said, you can't wait to see literally the bombs and the missiles falling to make your move. You have to see that with your spiritual eye and your prophetic eye. And that's what the prophecies have been for us. They have caused us to be able to see. Zechariah prophesied what is very vividly is a nuclear attack, a nuclear holocaust. So when, this is the last book I picked up recently when I was coming back from South Africa a month ago, nuclear war. The woman did a superb job researching it, researching the history of it, researching the scenario that may well unfold, what America is prepared for, what it's not prepared for, Russia, etc. I mean, right this very moment, you got Pakistan and India. Both of them are nuclear powers, and they're lobbing missiles and tank shells across the border over something foolish. And they both are nuclear armed. So there's so many different scenarios that could unfold. Of course, Ukraine and Russia and that whole thing. But we know that they're going to use these weapons, thousands and thousands of weapons, so they can talk all the peace they want. But we know, as in Revelation 17:17, Yah puts it in the minds of men to fulfill His will, and we realize that there is a destiny, a divine destiny, that those nations that have done the dirt that they have done on this planet, to the holy people, to the holy earth and environment, to nations all over the earth, to the atmosphere, put a hole in the ozone and so forth, and now they're hastening that. So there's a divine judgment that's unfolding before our very eyes. And unfortunately, a lot of people, our people are still talking about we, us. Shout outs to Jasmine Crockett and the brother from Texas, Al Green, and Senator Cory Booker and other, shout out to them. But the reality is the best they can do is inform us, hey, here's what they're planning. Here's what's going on. Here's what's unfolding. Because being honest, they'd have to say, we ain't got no power. Jasmine Crockett, she said it. She said, we ain't got the votes. We ain't got the votes. So what? You tell her, then you get everybody hyped up and waiting for another 3 years and 9 months from now, and then you can maybe vote them out of office. You know, no, it's got to be some other kind of strategy and plan. I don't think we have 3 years and 9 months at the rate this thing is imploding.
Yeah, it's rapidly, you know, a lot of things is, you know, happening. A war, I mean, World War III is bound to happen either next year or 10 years from now, whenever. It's bound to happen. It's written, you know, it's written. Like you mentioned, these countries, every country now pretty much dealing with nuclear power. You know, a lot of these countries have that, you know, in their backyard. So it's just a matter of time. But you know, I feel like for Hebrew Israelites, we have to, like you said, we gotta look past that, you know, and be like, okay, you know what, we need to really, you know, focus on what we need to do, because the world is out of whack. These institutions is out of whack. You know, we need to focus on building this new world, you know, and New World Passover coming up, you know. You know, we got to focus on building this new world, because that's what it's about, you know, building this new world. So when the old world it's collapsing now, but when it's finally collapsed, you know, we got something to lean back on. You know, we have something that we been building and been you know, preparing, you know, for these things.
This is over with, and we have to see it like that. We have to see that the end of the world in the days of Noah was not the water, it wasn't the rain. The end was the people's relationship with each other, the people's relationship with God, the people's relationship with the creation.
Wow.
That defined the end. So the water in Noah's time was simply what came to wash all that away and give us a new start. So it's similar now, because it was promised that as in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the days of the coming of the Son of Man.
That is right.
So we're here, we're back again at this particular stage, and definitely without question, we have to interpret it like that. That, you know, these you know, you talk about World War III, historians in the future, you know, just like if you ask what started World War One, they go back to Ferdinand, Archduke Ferdinand, who got assassinated. His car made a wrong turn and he got assassinated, and that's what really, well, honestly, if you go back 30 years prior, 1884, 20 years, Berlin Conference. European powers were dividing up the continent of Africa. And it was their jealousy. It was Germany in particular being basically landlocked, because she had the northern access to the sea. But basically, she needed resources to become an industrial power. And all the resources were being grabbed up by the other European nations. So she got left behind. All she had was Togo and Namibia and some other. She needed some other resources. And so jealousy among them caused friction. And the Berlin Conference was a gentleman's agreement kind of thing to try to stop and head off the outcome of that jealousy. And it put it off for 20 years, but it's still unraveled. And so that we can look back, historians can look back and say that's how World War One started. And historians in the future will look back on today, and we would say that, oh no, this thing started long before 2025. You know,
some would say it started, you know, in 2023. Some would kind of some can say that, you know, like you said, these things can be pinpointed, you know, in the future back to historical, you know, events. You know, that can be like, okay, this led to this. This was the beginning of this. So this was the beginning that led to this. You know, what you're saying is right on. And you mentioned it a lot. Now, before we keep going in deep, I want you to, because you went to South Africa recently. I want you to, you know, touch on, you know, your visit in South Africa and everything like that. Just touch on it and what y'all got going on out there in South Africa and everything.
Bilal, I've been in and out of South Africa since 2001 when Ben-Ami sent me there to assist our jurisdictions there. we have had brothers and sisters there conscious of their identity and wanting to align themselves with here. In fact, one of the brothers, Kohen Shaul, he's an 85-year-old elder now, who is our elder's father of the jurisdictions there. And he was living here for 10 years. He came here in 77 and became a priest, raised a family, and went back. Mind you, 77, he was technically stateless. He was in exile because of the apartheid government. And so him teaching, being diligent in teaching and planting those seeds, we have several hundred brothers and sisters scattered around in South Africa who identify not just with Hebraic and Israelite identity, but also with Damona directly in terms of the model, as you spoke of, the values, the formulas for the success we've had here. And so they need, these brothers and sisters are so rooted in terms of this idea, but some of the practical day-to-day functioning of community and organization and experience they lack. And unfortunately, the gatekeepers here have not allowed them the opportunity to come and travel and come and stay 3 months and extend, maybe stay 6 months and learn this model, which is what we've advocated for all along. Some have, they've gotten it, but just a year ago we had, well, 2 years ago now, we had a brother and his wife come. This was their second trip, and they came and they got arrested at the airport, held for 7 days, and deported. You know,
making it difficult.
So that has been an obstacle, and already you know the reality of the economic situation and the inequalities of South African society. And so here's a brother and sister who could afford it, and that's what happens to them. And so many can't even think, won't even think about coming because of the hardships, although we'll make a way for whoever. But these brothers and sisters, again, 2001, I've been in and out since, and I vowed to complete the task Benami advised me, so I spend a good 3-4 months there out of a year. And it's a great joy. For me, it was the culmination of, again, a purpose. I felt like my purpose was actually to be in that capacity, because South Africa, they're pretty much 40 years behind our experiences in the captivity, and the same kind of tactics and dynamics are used in controlling that black majority as were applied with this black minority in the captivity. And we really firmly believe that when apartheid was on the way out, that they were being counseled by the Americans to say, hey, we know how to control these Negroes. Allow us to guide and help you. And so far, it's worked, because it hasn't much changed in terms of the real dynamics of the freedom struggle. Free to do what? You know, free, you can get you a car now. You can live in a white neighborhood now. You know, and only a few of you can do those things. You know, so we know that's not real freedom. But that born free generation feels like, you know, they really have arrived. But at some point, all that's going to come crashing down, because that inequality, that injustice is unsustainable. And so the people will need to know how to organize themselves. They'll need to know how to grow food organically. They'll need to know how to eat properly, because one of the biggest things that came in post apartheid era was fast food. You know, and exploded out there, McDonald's and what have you. And the results of that are killing more South Africans a day than probably died during the course of the whole 60s, 70s uprisings that led to the overthrow of apartheid.
Wow, that's interesting. That's why it's important for us to, you know, go into Africa and build these institutions, you know, like, you know, plant-based restaurants and things like that, you know, to push out, you know, these other corporations that's out. McDonald's, they got Chick-fil-A in South Africa, they got Burger King in Kenya, all this stuff, man.
Right.
It's poison, and going back to like the first question, like as much is given, so much acquired. We have to be the ones, like we the real superheroes. I really believe that. We the real superheroes.
Right.
And I believe we have that power. I ain't saying we can jump off buildings and and fly. But we have the innovation in our mind to to change these things. And that's real power. That's real power.
Yeah.
But very interesting things you saying. Very interesting. So you going in and you saying so much that I can't even I want to touch on certain things you're saying, but you're saying a lot that I only can touch on a little bit. But you keep bringing it out, keep bringing it.
Okay.
So let me ask you this now. This is the second question I want to ask you. Is war and rumors of war escalating? And like what should the Hebrew Israelites be doing in these times where all this is accumulating and happening, right in front of our face, real time? What should we be doing as Hebrew Israelites?
Excellent question. We're certainly in those days that Yeshua prophesied of, and one thing about that is when it says when he said wars and rumors of wars, earthquakes, pestilence, diverse places, etc. That was the answer to a question that his disciples posed to him, and it's generally understood what shall be the sign of thy coming in reference to a second coming of this messianic personage, and that's not the correct translation of what they asked. What they really asked him was, what shall be the sign of thy presence? And presence and coming, one is present, and the other is in the future. Well, coming is always going to be in the future tense. But he was saying very clearly that when you see all these things, that's a testimony not that he's coming, but that he's here. That spirit is here. So that's the first thing about that. And then when you look at when you look toward the end of his Mount Olivet discourse, was what that particular chapter 24th chapter of Matthew, he says that except those days be shortened, there should no flesh be saved. No flesh. Again, an allusion to a nuclear holocaust on the planet. That Albert Einstein was once asked, what did he see World War III would be? He said, well, I don't know exactly. He said, but World War IV would certainly be fought with sticks and stones. So this great scientist, that was his response. But when you look at what has to happen to shorten someone's dominion, because that's what basically, except those days of Euro-Gentile rule over the affairs of humanity, except those days be shortened, how do we shorten his dominion? How do we shorten his days? Obviously it can't be militarily. That ain't our strength. We can't possibly amass enough weapons. We love our brother in Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traore. But there's no way that he could actually build enough military might, or all of Africa, should they unite around him, there's no way that we would have enough military might to counter that onslaught if it was directed at us militarily. Economics. What do we, if he takes all the gold and tomatoes in Burkina Faso, there's no way we can still compete with the larger Western world economies right now. How do we shorten this dominion? And it could only be by enlisting Yah and his interests on our side. We have in the U.S. I don't like calling it U.S. in Babylon, as we prophetically know
Call it what
be,
it is.
I moved around in the cultural conscious community for a season, and that was in the early 70s. And there was a saying that was rampant in the community, and it was that the best way to fight an alien culture is to live your own. And for us, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And culture is actually a weapon.
Yeah.
It's a weapon and it's a shield.
Yeah.
You know, when you
Wow.
come up under the culture that the Creator has framed and formed and fashioned and by His laws and gave it. I mean, laws for diet. And I get into these conflicts sometimes. I won't say conflict because I quickly bow out, because I'm not getting ready to argue with someone in 2025, Bilal, about the need to change your diet. That you don't need to be eating flesh.
Too much information out here for that. You know?
Just today, new information came out. Even in the Trump administration, they have now they're putting plant-based diets ahead of meat. Because they used to have that food pyramid. And meat was it. So now,
wow.
Meats are now they're the lowest of all the food groups right now.
Wow.
Not in terms of that pyramid. It's kind of tricky the way they're doing it. But anyway, the point is that, like you said, there's too much information that dictate and that confirm the wisdom of the same man who gave us the law about you can eat this animal, you can eat that bird, you can eat that fish, but don't eat these and don't touch that animal over there. The same man who brought us those guidelines is the same man who said in the very first book, very first chapter, said every herb-bearing seed shall be to you for your food. So in context, we know that fallen man was allowed those things. That's no great testimony that we can eat those things. But nowadays we brag, we eat anything. You can't eat anything, you know, and survive and run optimally. You know, it won't happen. So all of these things are part of culture. Dress, respect of children for parents, what you teach your children, how a husband relates to his wife, you know, and vice versa. All that is part of culture. And so culture, again, is a weapon and a shield. And all we need to do is revert back to that, because that's our strength. Even in the U.S., you know, there was a fellow who used to, I think he played guitar for Steely Dan. There was a group, Annandale, Virginia. They were from Virginia. It was Baxter, and he advised the U.S. government on the use of its soft power. So when you think about McDonald's and Coca-Cola, all over the world into the interior, you can't find a clean bottle of water in some places, but you can find a Coke. You can find a Coke.
You definitely. They got Coke all through Africa. Coca-Cola products, Sprite, Coca-Cola.
They're there.
It's there.
That's culture, you know, and so we know it's an alien culture, and we know it's a murderous culture.
Facts.
You know, diabetes and all the things that go with that. You know. So if our ability to align with Yah's interests and invoke His help in our struggle is what's key now. We have no hope of competing with this man on the military level. It won't happen. So when in monitoring our beloved brother Ibrahim Traore, I have actually I've communicated with our priesthood and said, look, this brother needs our prayers. We believe firmly in the power of prayer. And I explained to him, hey, here's what the brother's trying to do. Here's some of his policies. Here's the forces arrayed against him. And once they understand that, every day and evening, 3 times a day, the priest is collectively praying and including him, and his survival, his protection is on that agenda. And so we know that he needs that. He needs that. Other than that, what got us through all these years? You know, our ancestors over the years, through this hardship, through the dispersion, through the genocidal policies, you know, that frame our reality. And on that note, our people have always kind of, been uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, they wouldn't do that,
Mm-hmm.
Oh no, but every now and then somebody would come along and show them something and hint that, hey, they intend to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the same kind of whispering that was going on in Nazi Germany, and people wasn't hearing it. People wasn't hearing it. It snuck up on them about it. There can be, can be too late. And so we, in fact, I just wrote recently about that in Hit magazine about the genocidal clouds and Project 2025 and all of what that entails and all of what that's about and how it absolutely has genocidal implications for us as a people. We're looking at our end. They said economically in another 5 to 6 years, our net worth is going to be 0 or something as the average black family. We're looking at our end, and that's and we speaking of the African in American society, we're supposed to be the richest on the planet, the wealthiest. So what about the rest of Africa? If we don't turn this around, we're in trouble. And on that note, I would advise people to read this classic, The Wretched of the Earth, by Frantz Fanon.
Wow.
He was in 1961, he wrote this book, and he was a psychologist. He did a analysis of the revolution in Algeria, Northern Africa, and in his conclusion, in fact, skip all the rest of the book and go straight to the conclusion.
Wow. And
he simply says, leave this Europe where they are never done talking of man, yet murder men everywhere they find them. He says, we must find something different. We today can do everything so long as we do not imitate Europe. So long as we are not obsessed by the desire to catch up with Europe.
Wow.
So this is a blueprint for our rise. We don't want Ibrahim Traore to implement a social order and an agriculture order and an educational system that has as its blueprint to catch up
with the European
and imitate Europe. We've got to do it our own way, and it has to be one that maintains a strong spiritual foundation, because if Yah is not in it, it's doomed to fail anyway. And so that's the same thing that again, that was 1961 in Ben Ami's book, The Messiah and the End of This World, from 1991. Ben Ami says the same thing. How about that? Here we are again. Nuclear war. The Messiah and the end of this world, not the world. This world. Because the end is not the end of the planet. The last days are not speaking. It's the end of a dominion, like Yeshua said, except those days be shortened. So we have to look at these things completely different. And in the very first few pages, he talks about how African nations don't need to keep trying to catch up, because we've been actually blessed by being able to see the chaos and confusion that they're in today, and that if they wanted to, they can't stop. They can't stop before they go over the cliff. So why would we want to catch up with that? We should be able to look and say, well, we don't want to end up like that. Let us, what should we do? We need to go in the other direction. And the beauty, Ben Ami laid this out so masterfully. The beauty of it is that when we get to that realization, and we stop and turn around and start heading back to where we made the wrong turn, heading back to Yah, automatically that puts us in first place.
Wow.
All the other nations, if they slam on the brakes now, they're still going to slide off into the abyss, because their whole systems are tooled in that direction.
Wow.
But that's how the prophecy of us no longer being the head, the tail, and now we're getting ready to be the head. It's like that.
Wow.
We don't have to go back 400 years of retracing our steps, 2,000 years of exile to get back to a beginning. you can fast forward getting back to the beginning by just making that change of direction and changing that mindset. You know, and the rest of it, the Creator will bless you once you make that turn. One thing, you know, a lot of times, you know, people like to talk about Ezekiel and the dry bones. But you know, it's written. It says that I will bring you into the land of Israel, and then I will sprinkle clean water on you. And so the key there, the chronological order of the redemption is that you got to get back to the land first. And when you get back to the land, then he starts working with you. Then he starts washing you of all that filth and evil doctrines and what have you, those grave claws of belief systems and what have you. Even some that we still kind of fall back into, and we have to fall back into sometimes because, and I'm referring to names of the days of the week. Thor's day, Frigg's day, Saturn's day, the sun god's day, the moon god's day, etc., etc. And Moses told us that be careful, don't let the name of other gods be heard on your lips. But in order to make an appointment, if you don't have another frame of reference on what to call these days, you have to resort back, and for the sake of communicating, you have to fall back on that. But that keeps you at odds with the Creator. So we're all only doing what we've been taught, and that goes back again to the first question. You know, what's our role? If we're all only doing what we've been taught, obviously we need new teachings. That is the job. That is what Isaiah's 2nd chapter talked about, that many nations would come up to the house of the God of Jacob, and he will teach us of his ways, and then we will walk. It doesn't do no good to come up and hear it, and you don't take it back and apply it in your life. You know, so coming up to making a pilgrimage to Mecca, walking around the Kaaba 7 times, and you go back and the only thing that's changed is you now called Al-Haji. It's got to be something. It's got to be something more substantial than that.
Right on.
And that is what this process is all about. Jerusalem, the new Jerusalem, this model here at Dimona. You know, because Jerusalem's a people. When Yeshua in Matthew, I think it was 29, or it might have been 37, Yeshua says, he says, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, thou who stonest the prophets. Cities don't throw stones. It was the people that did that. So we have to be broad enough to know, you know, that it's not about some bricks and mortar. You know, it's about a people. You know, we're the bricks, and the mortar is are the concepts and the doctrinal beliefs and the practices and principles that hold us together.
Now what you're saying is hitting spots, man. It's, you know, and I really hope the viewers, you know, take heed to this just as much as I am. You know, I'm here, you know, interviewing, but I'm soaking up game. You know, and you know, it's important, you know, that people come here and not just come here just to sightsee, but come, you know, to Dimona and learn. You know, also learn. You know, but I'm still learning, and you know, I'm willing to learn and exchange my knowledge with y'all too, you know, and that's how we're gonna accomplish what we gotta accomplish, you know. So we'll tell everybody, we don't have a monopoly on truth. We claim to be I like what you said earlier about we're superpowers. We claim to be a superpower for truth, but that don't mean we have a monopoly on it. But whenever we get truth, when you bring pieces of truth and it comes to us, it finds its way to us, the next question for us is, how do we incorporate it into our lifestyle? Is it time? You might find the keystone to an arch in putting back this great house, you know, this great temple again, because we are this temple. You know, but you know that keystone, if you don't have the rest of those stones in place, you set the keystone over to the side. But these bits and pieces of truth, they have to be implemented. Other than that, you're just a knowing fool. You know, it's gotta take root in your daily practice and lifestyle. So iron sharpens iron.
And you're a testimony, because there were those who were telling you don't come here.
So, facts.
Right.
Yeah, and I'm keep coming back. You know, I ain't gonna stop. You know. Right. Let me ask you this now. Now, like, what's some steps we can do to bring Zechariah 2:1 to life? You know, gather yourselves together, ye a nation that's not desired. You know, like what kind of steps can we take? Practical steps. You know, because people be looking for mysterious things to happen. You know, all the time. You know, but what practical steps can we take to bring Zephaniah 2:1?
Well, it's important. I just recently was involved in a dialogue. I won't call any names, but I was involved in a dialogue where I told a couple brothers, I said, look, your leadership, understand your support and your wanting to protect the leadership. But those amongst you that you trust, y'all need to come and come together, sponsor a couple brothers to come up and investigate. Make an investigation. Don't stand off afar and just blaspheme and ridicule us. Yeah, it's not easy. You know, it's not easy. It won't be easy for you to get in the gate sometimes. You know, you'll have to step out on faith. Okay, all the American airlines have stopped flying into Israel right now. But this is about the third or fourth time in the last year or so. So is that going to disillusion us if this is our land? And if you really clear about who you are, do you think that Yah would invest all of his resources into awakening you, raising you up, and then you come 4,000 miles to get hit with a pop bottle rocket from some Houthis? Houthis? Who? You know, you know.
Oh, man.
We have to be more secure and have faith in our mission and purpose to know that we wasn't raised up for some kind of outcome like that.
No, right.
You know,
right, yeah.
it was written, you will not go altogether unpunished. But that ain't our prophetic destiny like that.
Yeah.
So we have to unite based on principles. We can postpone many discussions where we have differences. Some of them I understand, no, they can't be postponed. And we've got opposition that has kept us 58 years. 58 years outside of America. As you said, we're celebrating 2 weeks' time. 58 years outside of America. There's some principles that we claim made us successful, made us the largest organized body of African Americans outside of America.
Yeah, right.
We didn't just stumble on something here.
Yeah.
You know, we've actually built this.
Yeah.
You know, based on Ben-Ami's vision, and we're certainly thankful to his 5 decades of leadership in doing that. And leadership falls short. Charismatic is not something we would attribute to his style of leadership. He was much more than that. They would like to attribute it to just he could talk, you know. But no, he was a hands-on, deeply engaged, messianic personage, and that's how we carry it.
And you can tell based off the work, you know, based off the work.
Know a tree by the fruit it bears.
Exactly.
So there are principles that we can't compromise, and there are principles that would form the foundation for any partnerships moving forward. And so many times I've come to go to accept it and to use it at times, but in times past I wasn't using the analogy of the he-goat before the flock. But some brothers who are outside of the community have actually acknowledged that and lift Damona up, as that. And that's the kind of thinking that must be present amongst us as Hebrew Israelite leaders and men of big affairs. We've got to get to that point. And one of the things that Ben-Ami pioneered for us was his interpretation of it's twice. It's in the book of Micah and it's in the book of Isaiah. It says that you shall beat your swords into plowshares and your spears into pruning hooks. Well, he told us that is not about taking an M60 tank and making it a tractor, or F-35 and making it a crop duster. You know, obviously, again, those weapons are going to be used, and we think they're going to be used on each other. Europe, America, Russia, what have you. Russia is Europe, of course. But it's a message to us that whatever our belief systems were, Christian, Muslim, Hebrew, Jewish, what have you, he always talked about us having to undress. We had to go back. That seek ye the old past. So we had to turn around and go back. Sankofa in West Africa is the Adinkra symbolism meant it was a bird and its head was looking back. And the idea was that you had to go, in fact, the actual message of the Adinkra symbol, the language was saying, go back and fetch it. Because you lost something. Go back and fetch it. Go back to where you made that wrong turn.
Wow.
And so that idea turns us to go back and look back. And in doing that, you go back just a few hundred years, and you wasn't Christian. You know, go back another few hundred, you weren't Muslim. Keep going back, you weren't Jewish. You know, as Jewishness is defined today. You know, there was a time we wouldn't be Judeans either. We'd be the sons and daughters of Yah.
Exactly.
And that's what we've got to get back to, because if we don't, then all of those trappings, all of those garments, all of those nuanced things, you know, they're burdensome for us because they keep us divided. And we're not that different, you know. We're interdependent on this planet, and so but principles have to be laid out, criteria have to be spelled out, and we have to have men and women of integrity, and that simply means your yea is yea, your nay is nay. We don't need to sign no contract, because you would get a lawyer and I get a lawyer, and the lawyers will argue that didn't mean anything. It meant two different things, and we see that integrity. I trust you. When he says he's able to come or he's able to do this, we can rest on that. And if something happens and it doesn't pan out like he said, then our first thought is, something's wrong. Reach out for him. What happened? You know, we got to check on him. You know, that's our first inclination. So those are the kind of bonds we need to build, where we're not beating each other up with our doctrines.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the broken spear.
Yeah.
That's the broken sword.
No, right on.
You know,
right on.
and so that will enable us to manifest, you know, the promises. And so there ain't no other way. But we're in this fight.
Yeah, put our doctrines to the side, you know, and then we can bring the book to life as a nation. You know, as with our different communities, our different, you know, Israelite groups, or, you know, camps, you want to say, you know, because people are always so much about doctrine, you know. I ain't gonna say no people names or nothing, but you know, but people is so headstrong about this doctrine. This doctrine against your doctrine. This is the only way, you know. This is the only way it's going to work, you know. But you know, what I'm saying, it's deeper than that.
Well, you know, interestingly, one of the things, though, you know, and I think a lot of our people missed it, and it says that the doctrine of the kingdom would be preached to all the nations, and then shall the end come. Well, can a doctrine come before the kingdom came? The kingdom would have to be in existence, and then they would have to formulate a doctrine. And so our mission, our purpose and mission, based on that vision of Ben-Ami, was to come here to establish the long-awaited kingdom of Yah. And taking it out of that Christian mythized expectation of streets of gold, you know, descending out of heaven, literal out of the sky, what have you. You know, all that's Greco-Roman fabricated myth. You know, there's no streets of gold coming out the sky. There's no Savior coming out of the sky. You know, heaven is a higher elevated consciousness also in Hebraic thought. You know, so we've got to return back to those kind of things and manifest that. So a kingdom in practical, even biblically practical terms, is an organized group of brothers and sisters, men and women, who are governed by the principles of Yah. It's the kingdom of Yah. This was not Ben-Ami's kingdom. This was the kingdom of Yah.
Alright, so saying a lot of good stuff, man. A lot of good stuff that people really need to hear, especially Hebrew Israelites, so we can, you know, really move forward with this thing. Let me ask you this. What would you say is the biggest challenges to developing self-reliant communities in Africa? Like, what would you say is like one of the biggest challenges y'all had, or just out here at Demona, out in any jurisdictions y'all got established throughout Africa? What would you say some of the biggest challenges, is out there with trying to establish, a self-governing community?
The what we call the Egyptian mind, coming out of the Babylonian mind, the mind that was given to us in the captivity. In other words, take something simple as what should be our community structure. What type of houses, what type of economic system. What if we are coming and we're hoping to develop and helping to develop the continent?
Yeah.
What does that mean, develop? Again, going back to saying that we shouldn't be chasing after a European idea of development, because look at what their development means. In Benhami's first writing, he talked about how really good news would be not to say that you just open up a new hospital. Because if you built a new hospital, you plan on a lot of sick and dying people. But if real good news would be to say we destroyed a hospital, or we converted it to a house of jubilation for children to come. It's a community center. We tore it down, made a park. That would be real development in our perspective. So if we don't change the mind, then if we bring that mind into the continent, we create another hell. We create another Chicago, south side of Chicago. We create another black bottom of Detroit. And y'all knows we don't need that. And here's the good thing about that, is that we feel that there's a force field. There's a divine force field that the Creator will not allow that to be brought into the Edenic lands, as we like to call Africa. Eden means paradise. So we can't bring certain behaviors. We can't bring certain music that we're talking about whores and bees. What kind of society did you come from that allowed you to refer to your women as hoes and bees? So you want to now influence Africa in that direction, and they are being influenced in that direction. And honestly, South Africa leads the rest of Africa in that wrong direction. And so it's no joke. It's a serious overtaking, as we like to say. Language is so important. We want to seize control of how we think about things. We're not doing it to death. We're doing it to life. We don't want our sisters falling in love. We don't want to fall in love. We want to rise in love. So we don't want to meet deadlines. We meet lifelines. So those in the beginning was the Word. And words in Hebrew, actually the same root, are things, to speak. Devar and medaber, things, tangible substance. Starts from sound and thought. So we have to keep that in mind, and so we can't recreate hell on earth on the continent as its supposed saviors. And even that idea of saviors, nothing spooky and mythical about it. But the ironic thing is that you had men and women who were teaching back as early as the turn of the century, 1919, in South Africa. They were waiting on the brothers who had gone to Europe and were fighting. They were expecting them to come help them overthrow apartheid. And there's a whole thing I wrote about how that got twisted. And now that African prophetess's prophecy of the coming of the black man from America to help South Africans has been twisted. The understanding's been twisted in the mind of people from her church that evolved out of her teachings. That this was a prophecy referring to some white guy that came, and I went and checked the person who brought that out, and I said, no, that's not what she said. Just leaving one word out flipped the whole meaning.
True.
So this is it's not what I'm saying is that our involvement, our coming, our role, our prophetic role, because being honest, every organization got to have somebody at the head.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that the person at the head is more important than the person down in the mailroom or down in the boiler room.
Yeah.
Everybody's got their portion to play. But and this idea of chosenness has been usurped. It's been tainted. It's been tainted by a Eurocentric idea of superiority. You know, that's the problem with white supremacy, this idea of superiority. And so a white supremacist interpretation of what it means to be chosen in the biblical context has been perverted. We're chosen, all right, but the chosenness is not conveying superiority, it's conveying a greater responsibility and obligation. You know, to be that light, to be that bringer of the blessings. That's the chosenness. And you got to really be up on your game to take that on. Because Yah's not gonna play. He ain't gonna play around. If you say thus and thus, if you don't perform, it said your days are numbered. You have to be really cautious about that. Ben-Ami always told us, he said, don't aspire to be a leader in Israel. You know, that ain't something you wish upon yourself like that. Be a good follower. You know, but then that becomes the criteria to be a good leader.
Yeah, right on. That's true. Now that is true, man. That is true. And I like how you answering these questions. You know, you're giving your elaboration on it, and you're giving the answer, and you're elaborating on it, and it's very important. Let me ask you this now. Why are self-governing, reliant, diaspora, I'll say the word diaspora, but just Hebrew Israelites, just in general, people who want to just change the world, why are these communities important for today's society to have? Why is it important for it to be established like that, for us to have these things?
You got to have a successful model. You know, the National Urban League had a conference in the 90s, and they put out a book, and they had a quote, and it was profound. It was by a U.S. sociologist. Anybody who studied sociology would know the name Thomas Merton.
Okay.
And he said, in the laboratory of the social scientists, much like chemists and what have you, he said it's the 1,000 failures. You know, when you have 1,000 failures, and one success, he said you can throw the failures out.
Wow.
Chuck the failures away. Focus your energy on the one success to find out what made that work.
Wow.
And so this is a social, spiritual experiment. We could call it that. You know, when Ben-Ami was very clearly in alignment and clearly under the influence and direction of the Holy Spirit in that sense. But people could say it's an experiment. But after 58 years again, when does an experiment, not become? It's a formula. It's a tried and tested formula. Exactly. And so at that particular point, when someone recognizes that and all the success, man, they live how long? Y'all don't have y'all ain't taking no drugs, y'all not doing this. You just simply, here's the formula that allowed us to get this success. But what holds back so many of us, first egos, flexing, what have you, Ben-Ami stole the magic ring.
Yeah, I remember you told me that.
Unbelievable, but I witnessed this. Yeah. Marcus Garvey said for every 100 orders that he gave, do you know the number he said were carried out?
No.
Not 92, not 52, not even 22. He said for every order that he gave for the good of the organization of his United Negro Improvement Association, every 100 orders, he said, 2 were carried out.
Wow. And
the others weren't carried out because of people taking on airs, feeling like they know better, or that they were convinced that should do it like this, or they were greedy and kept some of the money, or they, you know, all the various different things that have undermined every organization that was for our good on the planet in history. Two, that's his own assessment of his own failures. Marcus Garvey, the great Pan-African, you know, leader and father figure. But that's reality, and we've had to endure those kind of disappointments and challenges, external, internal. But remember, Joshua told the children of Israel going into the land, said, "Fear not, be not discouraged." The land is promised by Yah, but you're going to encounter some things that's going to frighten you and or discourage you. And most of the discouragement can come from within often.
True.
So when it happens and it's your brother or your sister that's behind the discouraging, you just have to keep in mind, oh, he told me about this. We were warned about this. We expected this on the way to claim what is promised to us. You know, it wasn't, if it was an easier way, we'd have been told. Just traipse in, just waltz on in and get it. No, you was going to have to fight to claim this.
Don't nothing worth having come easy.
No.
You know.
You have to fight through that discouragement. And when something fearful jumps out at you, we move with haste when the sirens go off. When Iran was shooting missiles, we saw them. We saw them up in the sky because the Air Force base that they were aiming at is just over. It had to cross over us to get to the Air Force base.
Wow.
So when you hear that siren, you ever been here and heard that siren?
Nah.
You know, the tone, I'm sure it's engineered in a way to cause, you know, the heart and the brain to respond a certain kind of way. No question about it, that tone, you know. But we move with haste, but we're not frightened into you know, with freeze mode. You know, we move with haste, we do the things we need to do, we prepare. But after that, it's like, hey, Yah lives. Yah lives. We don't tempt Yah. You know, by being lackadaisical. You know, that missile might have somebody else's name on it next door, and we don't want to be too close to him. You know, when it hits time. You know.
Definitely.
So
that's definitely real.
Yeah.
Definitely interesting. Let me ask you this then. The Hebrew Israelite camps and the individual Hebrew Israelites who are not with, you know, specific camps. People who don't want to unite together to bring forth Zephaniah 2:1. Would you call them counter-revolutionaries? You know, and can you elaborate on that? You know, people who don't want to, you know, make a change. You know, they talk a good game, but when it's really come to the actions and really, you know, like setting pride to the side, setting certain doctrine to the side, you know, when they don't really want to do that, would you call them counter-revolutionaries to what we're trying to build as a nation?
I would think more that they're just simply unconscious revolutionaries, or they're not even revolutionaries at all. You know, you have to know what you're fighting for, and to think that you're going to affect a change, to think that you can be an Israelite and not connect with brothers and sisters and congregation to congregation and camp to camp, etc. And there's no hierarchy, there's no communication, and there's no deferment or deferring to order within that structure is naive. You're playing house.
Wow.
So come together, a nation. Nation, a people.
Yeah.
You know, you're playing house if you don't have that kind of structure and accountability within the ranks.
Wow.
So it's naive to think that you can function independently. No one's going to survive this. You know, think of. There's lots of brothers and sisters who have left America and have moved to various countries in Africa. But in most of the cases, it's just a matter of time before they're back in the neighborhood in the captivity, and their savings are gone. You know why? Because they did not submit themselves to others who had been before them. It don't make sense. Our 58 years outside of America, we can share with you some things. At the least, we can say, hey, you don't want to do it like this. At the least. So, you know, there's a formula for our success. You take H2O anywhere in the world, you know, put that formula together, you're going to end up with some water. Now, if you want to add a little XYZ in there, that's your business, but it ain't water no more. It might look like water, go down like water, taste like water, but it's not water.
Diluted now.
It might be a problem for you. You know, so we have to be very careful, and that's. So I wouldn't even think they've even gotten to the point of thinking revolutionary anything.
Wow.
You know, revolutionary, you know, is simply to change. You make a change. You remember the poet, as Nikki Giovanni said, if I just wore my hair in a natural, I would have a revolution. And look at how many of our sisters to this day are still pressing and subjecting their hair and their scalp to chemicals that are known. Every few years they come up with some new story about the chemicals in the Kanekalon, even in the extensions. Those chemicals leach into the sisters' scalps and directly into the bloodstream right next to the brain.
Wow.
And they're cancers, they're carcinogenic, but they still, you know, want to have those done. We wrestle with that. Culture.
We gotta
culture, man.
Tap in. Yeah, you're right.
Culture.
You're right. You know, set the religiosity. Religiosity to the side.
To the
you
side.
know, and let's focus on culture, because our culture gonna come with our own lifestyle, with our own, you know, what we need.
Right.
What you're saying is very. I want to say this because, you know, I thought I was evolving. I was evolving. You know, out in Africa studying. You know, getting into my books. You know, involving. But when I came to Israel in 2023, you know, that's when I was like, whoa! I just went, you know, to another. You know, and it just keep going. As Hebrew Israelites, you know, we have to keep evolving. You know, in understanding, and you know, as a nation, you know, we have to keep evolving. If we're not evolving, you know, we just being stagnant and not moving. So
fear not and do all His commandments. It's got to be broader than that. You know, because again, the commandments came about by way of the fall. Most of those commandments. You know, why did we need a commandment to tell us not to lay with some animals? How far had we fallen? And even now, the kind of things that our people are involved in and the behaviors are so decadent. But everybody's only doing what they've been taught. So in the ascension, on the way back up, you know, there's got to be some new revelations and some new laws and statutes and guidelines that fit the current context. 2025 is a different contextual reality from the days of Noah and the days of Moses. It's another reality. So certainly one of the commandments would have, thou shalt not smoke. But we know there's some evil reasoning that brothers say, oh, they don't say nothing about it. I can't smoke. You got to think. You know, Moses said all these, I said before you, life and death. So you'd have to have a law that said no wearing synthetic clothing. You know, because of the chemicals that leach into our skin. The skin is your largest organ. We can go on and on. And so those kind of revelatory truths, wherever they came from, whether it was on the front page of the Washington Post or New York Times, when we find truth, again, man, what are we going to do with this information? Because that's the beauty of this. You know, there's a scripture that says Israel was a long time without the true God, without a teaching priest, and without the law. That's not what it says. It says Israel was for a long time was without the God of truth. Elohe Emet. Elohe HaEmet. The God of truth. Not the true God. the God of truth. So that's Old Testament, and then you've got Yeshua saying, "Ye shall know the truth." So truth is this element that is central to us. Truth is Holy Spirit. So we've got to be a people of truth. And Isaiah said truth was kicked to the curb. Well, he said it was fallen in the streets, but kicked to the curb in modern parlance, you know. So we have to embrace truth wherever we find it, whoever brings it. And white folks got some truth. How did our fair-skinned brethren in the Judaic circles, how did they get to be so influential and powerful on the planet? It came by virtue of following certain laws and cultures. It was built into that. And they did the best they could to interpret it. But it's like a FM radio. 99.7 is the call sign. But your dial is 99.6. You'll pick it up sometimes, but it's gonna be staticky. It's gonna have a lot of interference up in there. So we as the root, that African root, we bring that spiritual element, that natural, whether it's scientifically encoded in our melanin and what have you, we bring the ability to get right on the nickel dot, right on the point, and get a clear signal, instruction, the right
frequency.
The right frequency. Got to get on the right frequency.
No, that's real. That's real though. I like that analogy. I'm gonna use it. Let me
hey, that's what we here for. We make you look good.
So Chinese, Europeans, the Arabs, etc., they can set up their own government. Why can't the children of Israel do the same? How we see all these examples of other governments. Like we should be able to do the same. I just get you to elaborate on that right there.
Well, we have. We have.
Yeah, I mean that. Hey,
yeah. And there are times that we've been accused of being a nation within a nation. That it can be scary. In fact, in the early days, we were known as the original Hebrew Israelite nation of Jerusalem. And nation, original. Well, what were we saying? That scared certain people, and we understood that, and we kind of meant it to scare them. We that's how we carried it coming out of America in the 60s. Our experience and what shaped us, and we were combative. We were combative, and we were received with defensively. And so we weren't ready for somebody to tell us you don't fit, you don't belong. So it was a recipe for conflict. And so in growing up and maturing and understanding that it's not about this. If Isaiah says that a stranger can get a name and a place greater than of sons and daughters, it ain't about this. It ain't about the DNA. It ain't about the gene, the bloodline. If we can call Abraham the first Hebrew, but wait a minute. If we was talking about this, we'd be talking about Chaldean bloodline and DNA and ancestry. So it's bigger than that. And so we're able to realize that there are men and women, Chinese, Russian, you name it, ancestry, who resonate with this message.
Yeah, right on. Yeah.
And we are obligated. First of all, that promise that said if a stranger can get a name and a place greater than sons and daughters, that makes us all humble. It should make us all humble.
Yeah.
I don't think BB and company yet quite understand that. But we're in their ears. We're in their ears about it. We're not a threat to them. We actually can protect them and be a source of their protection. If they're right. Righteousness exalts a nation. And that's the message that we preach. It doesn't matter to who. So government, government is, at this point we're well organized. Because again, government can scare folks.
Yeah,
Government
yeah.
in a government.
Yeah.
No, we're well organized. We clear. We not. Again, we don't have a ministry of defense like they got a ministry of defense.
Yeah.
You know, we do things differently, and Yah expects us to do things differently. And I think the world, those who really had faith in the Word and understood the Word and what their expectations were, they themselves have to be questioning how things are going right now, you know, with the state of Israel. And not, it's not looking too good, you know, and so we can help you. And it goes back to being on that frequency again. You got to acknowledge that that root. We can interpret some things and say no, here, and then convey that. So that's critical for us. Yeah.
No, right on. Now, just 3 more.
And by the way, that government is prophesied. It was to be on the shoulders of the messianic personage, whose mission was to raise up the messianic people. And it said that government shall be no increase. I mean, this should be not no increase, or it would just continue to increase. That government. And so we got to govern our family. People govern their families. People got to govern their own selves and their own habits and their own desires. That's a tough act. You know, the appetite, sexual appetite, dietary appetite. Some people can't do that. You know, so you have to really, you know, all these things goes into governance. And again, individuals will not survive. You need what's called an enabling environment. And that's all that we're talking about government. The neighborhoods and families have to grow. And that influence has to grow and expand until the whole earth is covered by this.
True indeed. Now, let me ask you this. What are some key things Hebrew Israelites today should take and use from, you know, the 50s and the 60s civil rights movement that the brothers was doing in the 60s? Like, what are some things that we can take and use in today's time, and some things that y'all already probably been taking and using, you know, in today's time? Like,
well, I mean, I've seen a little Instagram, TikTok kind of thing recently, where it was a bus company down in one of the southern cities that 13 black men came together and started a bus company. I forget the name of it, but it was very successful. And my question is, well, what happened to it? You know, what is it today? Do they own thousands of buses, bus companies across the captivity? And the answer, I'm sure, is no. So what happened? But there, you know, our struggle was led by spiritually led men and women. Whether it was civil rights, whether it was human rights, whether it was Pan-African. You know, and one of my writings is about the Pan-African roots, or excuse me, the spiritual roots of the Pan-African movement. And there's a tendency now to be led by those who are fundamentally atheists, you know, who have no inclination, but we understand the disillusionment that went along with religiosity, but we've got to distinguish between religiosity and real spirituality. And so spirituality is 24/7. All your everything matters where the Creator's concerned, and it's got to reflect that. And where it doesn't, that's a chink in your armor that leaves you vulnerable. You know, so we've got this. We've got this. We can do this, and we can learn from. I think the best learning is from failures, because we have to be honest. Civil rights movement is a failure. You know, because all the victories are being undone right now. But we're not. What is that? What are these events telling us? Telling us you don't belong there. You don't need to be there. But what was the movie Get Out? What was Brother Peele trying to convey? You know, get out. You know, you can't hear. What was Dr. King saying in his last months about integrating into a burning house? Get out. What more what does it mean when the people say when somebody tells you who they are, believe them?
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at a Pete Hegseth, and when you look at the guy that was going to be the justice, the attorney general, who was a scoundrel,
Mm-hmm.
you know, when you look at these evil men and women who have mastered these dog whistle,
Mm-hmm.
you know, language.
Yeah.
What do you see? What are you hearing? Why do you want to resist that
Mm-hmm.
and not say, hey, let me pack my business. Let's throw in the towel on this.
Yeah.
You know, and if you're an Israelite,
Mm-hmm.
you know prophetically you don't belong in that.
Yeah, right.
But
right on.
they have those Christian expectations that something mythical and mythological is going to fall out the sky and deliver them.
Greco-Roman.
Greco-Roman idea. Yeah.
Greco-Romanized. Let me ask you this. If you don't know your past history, then how will you, understand, your future? How will you be able to dictate your future? How will you be able to, put your the destiny in your own hands if you don't understand your future? I mean, if you don't understand your past, how would you be able to proceed in the future?
It is impossible.
Mm-hmm.
Your history is directly tied to your destiny.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I have to. I was taught. I was again spokesman. I assisted Bellamy in many of his writings.
Yeah.
But one of his masterful classes was that about history and destiny.
Mm-hmm.
And we've always assumed, in fact, that one of the definitions of destiny, it says it's a predetermined
Mm-hmm.
station,
Mm-hmm.
an unavoidable station.
Mm-hmm.
And so it has caused us to feel like your destiny is what you're going to meet no matter what you do.
Yeah.
But that's not true. When you go to the doctor,
Mm-hmm.
he'll give you a form. You have to go sit down,
Mm-hmm.
and you're checking off all the boxes that is part of your family's history
Yeah.
to show that you have a genetic disposition to something. It runs in your family.
Yeah.
It's your history.
Yeah.
And so that history,
Mm-hmm.
the doctor knows, can impact on your destiny.
Yeah.
Do you smoke?
Mm-hmm.
And if you answer yes,
Mm-hmm.
well, it's a known fact.
Yeah.
It's written on the side of the packs.
Yeah. That it
This
causes-
this will cause thus and thus and
Yeah.
thus.
Exactly.
So history does
Mm-hmm.
have an impact on destiny.
Yeah.
But
Mm-hmm.
if you stop smoking
Mm-hmm.
today,
Mm-hmm.
in a month,
Mm-hmm.
in a year,
Mm-hmm.
10 years,
Mm-hmm.
you have created a new history.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. I know personally, I smoked for years before and if I came into this knowledge
Mm-hmm.
and stopped smoking at 21,
Mm-hmm.
let me tell you, be truthful, I started smoking at 12.
Mm-hmm.
I used to steal cigarettes
Mm.
from the local drugstore.
Mm-hmm.
Thought I was, and developed a habit.
Mm-hmm.
Foolish,
Mm-hmm.
just being foolish,
Mm-hmm.
but created a new history.
Mm-hmm.
Now, God forbid that wayward behavior, causes something down the line, but nevertheless the body is constantly
Yeah.
recycling and cleaning itself up
Yeah.
and recreating itself.
Yeah.
That's science.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully I I definitely have a new history
Mm-hmm.
and got a new destiny.
A better future.
It's
Yeah.
a better future. And so we have to strive to create that history
Mm-hmm.
and base it on things that work, epigenetics,
Mm-hmm.
because you can overcome the genetic.
Mm-hmm.
The genetics are only, scientists tell us that they're only responsible for 3% of the manifestation of
Mhm.
something.
Yeah.
The rest of it is lifestyle choices, diet, environment, what you wear,
Mm-hmm.
even how you think.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you tend to be depressed and negative or whatever, if you got friends around you, what kind of music, all those things impact
Mm-hmm.
on the other 97%.
Wow.
But the genes is only 3% of the manifestation.
Mm-hmm.
So we got a
Wow.
pretty good chance.
Yes.
Recreating this, creating a new environment, which we call heaven. We call heaven.
Yeah. Now, well answered. Well answered. Now, this is the last question right here, man.
Right.
We've been, it's been an interesting interview. Let me ask you this: how can us, as a people, just in general, how can we evolve from the state the world is in today, and what part do the Hebrew Israelites play in this evolving, into this direction it needs to go, just in people in general, and then what do the Hebrew Israelites play with that, with that role?
Jacob is the former of all things. The burden's on our shoulders. We have to, in all honesty, when we recognize who we are, we have to take responsibility for why the world is in the state it's in. It was our fall that allowed that, as it's written, said, children shall rule over them. It was our fall that allowed a relative child to rule the planet. 500 years. They've been running the planet 500 years. And they've run it into, can't say run it into the ground, they've run it into hell. They've turned the planet into hell.
Yeah.
That's our fault. That's our fault. They used to say you could fall so far till a roach will crawl over you. And that's where we are. We became the tail. That's Deuteronomy. Everything in Deuteronomy 28, 15 on. That's our reality. Yeah. We brought that. And so, there was a consequence for the rest of the planet because the light was extinguished. The light was covered up, and some imposter light, was set up. We use that word imposter. Fake light, fake light. But everything today is like that. Discernment is key. Malachi said, "Time of the end, you shall discern. You shall return. You shall discern between he that serveth Yah and he that serveth him not." That's our role. But just as it was in the beginning, said the devil is the most subtle of all the beasts of the field. And subtle simply means hard to detect, fine, delicate. So you have to listen very carefully to people. You have to listen very carefully to government and heads of state. What is he really saying? But if you've got the gift of discernment, if you've got godly discernment, Yahweh discernment, then you'll know the difference. Something's wrong with that. So when a President Biden, when he applauds Congress having awarded, I think it was, what was it? It was $190-some billion worth of weapons. 60-some billion went to Ukraine, 30 billion went to Israel, and he even sent a couple billion to Taiwan. And Biden the next day said, "It's a great day for world peace." What? And I never heard anybody say, "Man, you're crazy. You're whack. That's whack." What are you saying? What? But in our world, we who can discern, who've been told, when they say peace, peace, sudden destruction, we who know the language and we who know the history, we'll be able to say, that's the devil. That's Satan. And we have to govern ourselves accordingly. So that gift is what we bring to the table. That gift is what every man and woman need to be praying for. And as our Father always told us, he said, if you're praying, if you're weak, if you got one eye, you need to be praying. If you're blind, you need to be praying for somebody that's got eyes to see. That's what you need to be praying for. Not that you by some miracle get some eyes. you need somebody that can see, that can help you.
Yeah.
You know, and that's taking the myth out of it.
Mm-hmm.
That's taking the myth out of it. So we are in the days of the resurrection.
Yeah.
And that resurrection is we're bone to bone.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you and me,
Yeah.
you and your people here.
Mm-hmm.
You know, those that you come in contact with, brothers that you can talk about. You know, you mentioned. I was looking at a message, listening to a message earlier today. One of the brothers, we need to get together.
Yeah.
These bones coming together.
Yeah.
It's not mythical. We've got to organize. We've got to strategize. We've got to stand up and do this thing. So it's just a great. It causes you to. We always say, you know, pinch yourself. You know, this is it really has come in our lifetime. You know, it had to come in somebody's lifetime.
Yeah.
The resurrection, the ascension, the kingdom had to come in. Other than that, till kingdom come, it was never going to come.
Mm-hmm.
So we're saying it's here.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to believe,
Mm-hmm.
but all beginnings are small. All beginnings are hard.
Mm-hmm.
And it's supposed to be like that.
Mm-hmm.
In a world of deception, where deception is the rule, the truth gonna sound strange in the beginning.
No, right on.
But we got this.
Yeah, we got it.
We got this.
We definitely do.
We got this. And
Yeah.
and if y'all be for us,
Mm-hmm. Who can be against us?
right.
And it was a blessing to definitely have you again.
Likewise,
man.
Bilal.
And I
Hallelujah.
love having these conversations with you, man. So Ahmadiel, the Minister of Information, you know, not just for
I'm
the
your
moment. Yeah, exactly.
I'm your Minister of
Yeah,
Information.
Exactly.
We're not your enemy.
Right on. Right
You know.
on.
But you don't wanna make us your enemy either.
Right on,
No.
man. Shalom, shalom.
Hallelujah.